Welcome to episode number 12, The Blurring of Hanukkah and Christmas. 'Tis the season, heaps of Hanukkah presents to offset Christmas FOMO, giant Hanukkahs lighting up our yards, a Hanukkah bush in the window, just behind the Hanukkah, family pajama pics on Instagram. But that one I'm pretty sure Christmas stole from Hanukkah. Anyway, we are here to talk about how Hanukkah is changing in a culture where Christmas decorations, retailers are here in September. But I'm really guessing that the retailers are shaping some of this change because there's an awful lot more Hanukkah merch out there than ever before. So let's figure out how you're managing Christmas and Hanukkah in the December dilemma, in the choices you make for your families, the choices for sanity, for meaning. But let me check in on my co-host, Rabbi David Steinhardt. How are you this week? It's hard to
I'm
believe
great.
Thanksgiving was a week ago. That's crazy too.
You don't get much space between Thanksgiving and the holiday preparation for the end of the year, that's for sure. I'm really glad you chose this topic. There's so much in it. And the reason you chose it has to do with a lot of things, not just merchandising. It's got to do with family life, interfaith families. It's got to do with where we stand as a minority in a majority culture. And I will tell you, there's stuff in the traditional story of Hanukkah that actually will inform this conversation, which I'll get to. But I'm really glad, Amiee and Rachel, that you're with us. Naomi, too, of course. I'm glad that you're with us. And I look forward to this conversation.
Well, I want to introduce the guest, but Rabbi, I'm going to put you on the spot here for a second, because as some of us were chatting before the podcast, we were kind of curious if you have a bias in this. When I first came here 18 years ago, that is Hanukkah the Jewish Christmas, with the answers like, no, Hanukkah's not a major holiday. And so there was a huge gasp. And now over the last 5 to 10 years, I see my classes, as families talk about traditions and choices, getting a little blurry. And so this is an active, ongoing process for us. But you have a bias in this. You have a perspective on this of your own before we get to the Torah.
Yeah, I do. I don't know if I'm getting to the Torah, but I do have a perspective. The first is that you could ask a lot of Christians if Christmas is actually a Christian holiday, and they'll tell you it's been so influenced by the capitalistic market that it doesn't have anything to do with Christmas either. So I think that what we find is that there's a response to other large forces out there in the culture. So we live in this materialistic world, and it's driven by things. And so of course, it was just a matter of time before Hanukkah would become like Christmas is. And people in the Christian world are rethinking Christmas also. So that's one thing. The other thing is that almost every Christian family that you can name, that you know, has a Jew in it now, right? A Jewish person, because intermarriage is so prevalent. So of course, then there's going to be crossover and a desire to make Hanukkah feel a little bit like Christmas. That's another thing. And then the third thing, I could touch on these a little bit more deeply in a little while. But the other thing here is that one of the messages of Hanukkah is really about accommodation. That what happened in the very beginning is Hanukkah took on the celebration of lights that was being done by earlier cultures. The Greek culture had celebrations of life, and they gave it new meaning. And so our challenge then is to give this a meaning that is reflective of our values.
I love it.
Okay? Yeah.
And there's a lot. I mean, of course, we could spend all month, but I'm going to introduce our guests, and then for all the guests, including Naomi, but especially the young moms, how all of that informs choices for your children. Because as we make choices for ourselves and our grown-up families is one thing, but when we have to explain to young children, this is what we celebrate and what we don't, or how or why, it takes on a whole different sense of meaning. And sometimes that anguish and fear of missing out. So I have three amazing guests. I have the Rachel Sobel, mom blogger from Wine and Cheez-Its, and that's WHINE and cheese with a Z, it's.com. But Rachel, I think one of the reasons I was so excited to have you join us is because I think you live and breathe social media and those cultural forces coming at families all the time. Our other mom is Amiee Mittleman, and I am very, very excited because you have a young son. And so you are just beginning this journey. But when we talked about it in class, you had mentioned that you had gone to a private Christian school in our area. And so you've had that sort of interfaith influence juxtaposition personally, and then to shape the choices you'll make for your family. And then we have Miss Naomi Gordon, our favorite Miss Naomi, who is our early childhood director here at B'nai Torah congregation. And I know that she lives the choices as a grandmother, as a mom, but she's also watched the changes in our school and our families and how we celebrate what we celebrate and how we are inclusive and respectful. So I'm very excited, but I'm going to kick it to Rachel first. How has this shaped the choices that you make for your families, your family, and your worries and your anxieties and your fears and all of the above?
Well, you know that I am not one to follow societal rules. Like I basically, if you give me a rule, I'm going to push the envelope a little bit because I want my kids to do the same thing as they get older. So I'm probably on one side of the spectrum. But with Hanukkah, I think that it's become, because of social media and all the targeted ads you get on Facebook for the matching Hanukkah pajamas, all these things, there's a lot more inclusivity because of media for people who celebrate Hanukkah. For the first time in a very long time in the last several years, there's much more decorating and all kinds of things available to us that we really didn't have. And I think that's why people joked that it was Jewish Christmas, because we would buy Christmas trees and call them Hanukkah bushes or whatever we did. In my house, we do a lot of fanfare because my kids do have FOMO. They do. And they have friends who are decorating giant Christmas trees and all kinds of stuff. I mean, I'm a step away from buying stockings. That's like the ledge you're going to have to talk me off of. But we have a Hanukkah tree and it's all blue and silver. We stick with the Hanukkah theme. We still light our menorahs and say the appropriate prayers and honor all of the Hanukkah traditions. But we have a little glitz and glam to it because now it's available to us. It never was before. And my kids get excited when they walk into a store or they're on the computer or they see me on social media and they see the things that are now accessible to us. And so we're embracing it.
Rabbi, do you want to respond to that before?
Well, let's go to Amiee.
Well, wait, I want to ask one other question before we go to, and that is, how do you differentiate? As you start bringing the glitz and glam, how do you express to your children? And you have an older child who you are giving explanations to, and on a pre-K, she's not so little anymore.
Yeah.
So it's, how do you say that, but this is not Christmas?
So my kids associate Christmas with Santa. Like that's basically the biggest differentiation. My mother really put me in a pickle because she did tell them a couple years ago that sometimes Santa comes to Jewish kids' homes if they are well behaved. So I had to put a kibosh down there and tell her that that does not happen. But they really associate Christmas with the commercial side of it. They see Christmas trees and Santa and sleighs and reindeer. They understand there's a religious component, but I think for them, we are such a Jewish home in terms of all of the Jewish holidays, including Hanukkah, that we celebrate and honor, that I don't think they ever see, they never, that line is not blurred for them in the sense that they think we're taking on too much Christmas tradition. I think they see that we're taking Hanukkah and we're making it our own.
Thanks.
I will respond to that before Amiee. I think that, the key here is that it not be a Jewish Christmas, but rather all these things that you're doing to decorate and celebrate are about Hanukkah, and that the kids learn the meaning of Hanukkah and they learn what are the values behind what we are doing. I just want to tell you, Rachel, you drew a line at Santa Claus. That was that's your line.
I don't know why it's a line, but yeah, I feel like Santa is very Christmassy. It's not, in my mind, that is what I always associate with Christmas. And so, yes, I drew a line there, but maybe I shouldn't.
Well, I'm not going to tell you whether you should or shouldn't, but a little historic context will tell you that in Germany, 150 years ago, And 100 years ago, Jewish families had a Hanukkah man who was equivalent to Santa Claus. And what Christians will tell you about Santa Claus is that this was developed from a pagan ritual of this guy who was this gift giver, I guess, and then it was connected to a particular saint, and Karen can help us there. And so origins, and then how meaning develops from origins, is a really interesting thing. Your obligation is to make sure that none of this stuff stands for anything but what you want it to stand for, and that is the celebration of Hanukkah. I used to say that it's not about comparing Hanukkah with Christmas. It's about comparing Christmas with Jewish celebration, so that a family that observes and celebrates Shabbat and celebrates the holidays and celebrates Hanukkah, then that FOMO doesn't have to be quite as intense, in spite of what's going on in the, in our larger culture, but it's there.
Right. Thanks, Rabbi. Amiee, choices you're making and how you feel about the big questions.
Like I mentioned this to you in class, I was raised very conservative. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors, and it's been very important in our family that we instill the Jewish culture and religion and practices and traditions in our kids to honor what our family, fought for and died for ultimately. So in my family growing up, I never celebrated Christmas. We didn't do any Christmas trees. My dad would never allow that, even though if my mom wanted to make it fun, because everyone else was doing it, it just wasn't allowed in our home. That doesn't mean that we didn't go off to our friends' houses and we didn't celebrate with them and do things outside of our house. So being that I was raised that way, I originally thought that that's how I would raise my child. Fast forward a few years, our family does have my cousin's husband, who's like my brother, is not Jewish. He celebrates Christmas. Their kids celebrate Christmas and Hanukkah. They're being raised both. My brother-in-law is Hindu. So, Diwali is something that we teach our kids about also, because of my nieces and nephews are going to be celebrating that as well. So I think what we plan to do, and who knows, is in our home, we'll celebrate Hanukkah and teach our son that he is Jewish and these are his traditions and his beliefs, if that's what he wants. And outside of his home, if he wants to partake in practice, I want him to do that. I want him to be immersed into culture and traditions of other people's religions, not just our own, and know that there is more than just the Jewish religion. But I also want him to know where he comes from and what his family went through for him to, be here and continue on the Jewish religions and traditions. I think that's important that we don't forget that and mix it up. But again, he's 1.5. So I don't know.
And so how have the last two Hanukkahs evolved for you?
So
are you seeing traditions come into?
Yeah, I mean, he's helping. He with me, everything's about cooking. I always turn back to cooking. So in terms of cooking, he's been helping me. He helped me make latkes this year. We light the candles every night. He knows to go get a present now. He runs into where we're hiding them. He gets his presents. We have a Hanukkah party. We did, one thing I think is different is we decorated Hanukkah cookies instead of some people do that for Christmas. So I think that was something that we kind of stole, if you must, from the Christmas traditions. And yeah, we'll see. I mean, so far we're just keeping it pretty simple. We are going to be going to California for Christmas and staying with my cousins who celebrate Christmas. So he has his pajamas that he's going to wear Christmas morning. I know he has a stocking in their house. He's going to wake up with his cousins and see how they celebrate Christmas in the morning. So that will be his first time doing that. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see how he reacts to it. And if it's something that he asks for later on, now that he's becoming more alert and engaged, he definitely, his biggest thing is what's that? So I think that's going to be, he's going to want to know what all these things are. And we're going to want to teach him, what that is, I think. Right. I don't know. I'm a new parent, so I'm figuring it out.
And he will lead you to the questions and
Right.
to the answers. Rabbi, do you want to jump in here yet?
Yeah, no, I think that it becomes an issue when your kid is not grounded in Jewish ritual, Jewish practice, where there's not a strong Jewish identity. Because as I said earlier, almost every Jewish family has some, or almost every non-Jewish family has Jews in it. Almost every Jewish family has someone who intermarried. And so the exposure is going to be there. The exposure is problematic only if your kid doesn't really know who he or she is.
Yeah.
So if they know that what they are, then these outside forms aren't quite as significant. You are doing Hanukkah, in a real way for your kid. So
I'm happy we're
the,
having,
the issue is really, raising your kid with a firm foundation that creates an identity of being Jewish. When your identity is not secure, then you're going to obviously run towards the Christmas lights.
and what I love about it is that it's so individual and that there is an inclusivity. And it's a terrible, I don't know. I mean, maybe I felt this more than the others, and I'm going to pass it to Naomi next. But I think my purpose when you said you wanted to have this conversation, Rabbi, is to say our senior rabbi, our conservative synagogue community is okay with a diverse world, because I think that not everyone is sure, am I allowed to open my family or to break with traditions that I might have had from my parents? Rachel, were you thinking of something to add here?
I think that what Rabbi said, the last point he made, I think that extends to everything in parenting. If you're giving your kids an identity, whether there's religious components or confidence components, whatever it is, that is what you're setting them up for success, to own who they are and be comfortable being exposed to different things in life in general. And so I love that statement because it's true for Hanukkah and Christmas and all the other holidays, but just in general, as a parent, I think that's our job. That is what we're supposed to be doing.
And you, as the mom of a middle schooler who has felt the pressures of peers and the less than pleasantness of social experiences, how grounded that family makes it. Yeah. Naomi, you have been a nurturer, supporter. You are holding lots of people's hands through celebrations and rituals. Tell us where you're what you've seen change and not change in the celebrations of Hanukkah.
Well, I think it's funny you said 18 years ago it was like, where were we versus now? And I think, forgive me, Rabbi, one of the most important holidays I teach in the school is Martin Luther King and diversity, and teaching that this is who we are, but that we embrace that we're all different. And so I think at this season, we see a lot of talk about same and different, because we do have children in our school who come from multicultural homes, not even just different faiths, but totally different cultures. And they have different ways of celebrating. And what I love about what we do here is that we teach Judaism. We eat it, we sleep it, we drink it. We're doing Hanukkah all week. Yet when a child comes in and says, but my daddy celebrates Christmas and I want to make a Christmas card, we say, oh, well, what is your tradition in your home? Or I love that you want to do something for your daddy. So we embrace that the children have these real emotions, and that they're welcoming, but that they know that this is what I'm celebrating. And I have a funny story. I'm a grandma of 7, and I was at my grandchildren's house last week, and my grandson sat down next to me and he said to me, you know what, Nana? You're my favorite Jewish grandmother. And I laughed. But he said, because you give me the Hanukkah presents and my Mimi gives me the Christmas presents. But they know, and they know that there's traditions that I bring to their home, and we made latkes. I left before Hanukkah, but we made latkes. And they know that their Mimi brings other traditions to their home, and they understand that they are getting 2 different worlds, and that's what's happening with a lot of the families that we see. But the most important thing is that we give these children the foundation, and to really have that strong identity of who they are and where they come from. And that's what we do here with our children in our school.
So that's your responsibility as a director of a school. And that is, and that's what you say, we give our children the foundation. But really, I think the most important thing, Naomi, is that they're coming from a foundation. That is, it's got to be, this cannot be a conflict that arises the day after Thanksgiving. This has got to be something that there's an awareness of all the time. We are a small minority in a majority culture. So then the question is, how do you create that foundation at home? Not just in terms of what you give the kids, but how do you live your lives as Jewish people in a place that affirms that we are part of a larger society? Because certainly one of the options we see is to be part of a religious community that cuts itself off from, separates itself off from the rest of society. And then you don't have the level of conflict that you feel in this. But we choose not to. We want to be in an open society, and we want to be Jewish in the open society. And so it's the, having a universal vision, which is what Martin Luther King does in your school, and having a particular identity. And that's a unique Jewish thing, by the way, to be both particularistic and with a universal vision. I'll tell you a story that was something that was challenging for me. My oldest son, who's 41 now, when he was like 2 years old, the day after Christmas, I was a rabbi in Ohio at the time. I went to the dry cleaner to pick up clothes, and I brought him in with me, and I sat him down on the counter. And the woman behind the counter said, "What's your name?" His name is Avi. He said, "Avi." And she said, "Oh, I haven't heard of a Harvey in a long time." And he said, "No, Avi." He's like correcting her. And then she said, "Well, Avi, what did Santa bring you yesterday?" And he said, "Nothing." And she said to him, and this is like unbelievable. She said, "Well, you must have been a very bad boy." And so I had to then say, "No, ma'am, my son Avi's Jewish, and he's proudly Jewish, and he got presents for 8 nights from his Jewish parents." And I didn't mean to embarrass her, but that was an example of being in a very, a very Christian culture. So this woman didn't even have an idea that there was someone that might not have celebrated Christmas.
We hear so many stories in class of just people, interactions with complete lack of awareness. So I ask all of you going forward, how there seems to be a controversy in our culture about saying happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah. When Hanukkah and Christmas fall at the same time of the month, it's a little easier maybe to say, which are you celebrating? Be specific. How do we manage we want people to acknowledge Hanukkah. We want to be able to say, if I don't know what you celebrate, I prefer to say happy holidays because I don't want to make an assumption. Amy, how?
I'm just thinking like what your story reminded me of. So when I went to college in Arizona, I grew up in Wellington and Boca, and in my head, I wanted to kind of get out of this bubble, and I wanted to go somewhere where there was a little bit more diversity and different people. I'll never forget this. One of my best friends and roommate basically said to me, she didn't understand why I was going home for Thanksgiving and why I was going home for the holidays, because she said Jews don't celebrate Thanksgiving. And I said, it's weird. I'm American. I celebrate Thanksgiving, and I'm going home for Christmas break because I celebrate Hanukkah. And she really just didn't understand that concept. And then I kind of realized, wow, I'm really not I'm not in Boca anymore. I'm not like surrounded by Jewish people anymore. And this is kind of why I wanted to get out and do more, which is where it comes back to me wanting my child to also have the opportunity to have a diverse upbringing, because I don't want him to just only know Judaism. I want him to be able to understand other people's religions and traditions and holidays. And yeah, I think we live in a society where outside of where we live, actually live here, not many people experience Judaism. You know what I mean? And you don't realize it because you're surrounded by so many people where we grow up and where we're raising our kids. But when you actually step outside of, certain areas, you do realize like we are the minority, and it's really important for us to kind of explain that to our child as well, that their religion is the minority. And I think that's going to be like a little bit of a challenge, having them grow up around the same people. So I think it's important in schools, as Naomi was saying, that you encourage the diversity that are in the families that are in the school, even though we are sending our children to Jewish schools and we want that Jewish education. It's nice for them to know and be around other kids that are mixed families, and explaining that that's normal. That's a new normal, really, because back in the day, I don't think we really are, like, I know my parents, that was really unheard of. It took my grandmother a really long time to digest other people coming into her Jewish family that didn't own up to her traditions and her beliefs. So our family was it opened up our family's eyes a little bit more, her eyes specifically, to the diversity that, we live in.
Rachel, Merry Christmas.
It's funny, and I agree with every word that Amy just said. It's so true. And I had a similar experience in the first part of my life when I lived in Tampa after I graduated college. It was the first time I'd celebrated Hanukkah as an adult without my parents buying gifts, and I had to go get a menorah. And I went into Bed Bath and Beyond in Tampa, and there were no menorahs. And I asked, "Do you have any menorahs?" And they said, "What's that?" And I had never, and there's a big Jewish community in Tampa. So it's not like there aren't Jewish people there, but I had never been met with that level of ignorance because I too grew up in South Florida where it feels a little more insular because there are such big Jewish communities. I had never experienced that before. And so with the whole Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, I try not to put too much stock in the words. I think that people genuinely try to do the best they can and they get flustered because nobody knows what to say. And so I'm not one of those people who gets offended if someone says Merry Christmas to me. I just say you too. I don't give them the lesson and say, "Oh, I'm Jewish and I celebrate Hanukkah," because I don't know that it would necessarily change their behavior, but it doesn't get under my skin that much. I think it's more the commercial side of it that people are celebrating. I don't think they're trying to offend you necessarily by not acknowledging that you're Jewish. That being said, if I'm in a situation and it's the middle of Hanukkah and someone says Merry Christmas to me, I will say, "Oh, thank you so much, but we're Jewish and we celebrate Hanukkah," just so that my kids see the example of standing up for yourself, your religion, and making sure that people know who you are and what you represent. But I think that we have to focus less on the verbiage that's being used and more on the overall acceptance of different religions and cultures and the bigger picture. It's not always about the words. It's such Merry Christmas is just what people say because they're conditioned to say it. And I just don't think we're going to live in a world where everyone is default to saying Happy Hanukkah. That's not going to happen. So I default to Happy Holidays. But if someone says Merry Christmas to me or my kids, it's not one of those things that makes me feel less Jewish.
And
Rachel,
that's an interesting distinction that you're okay with your children hearing it, where I might, for a child, want to clarify. But again, I don't think there's a right or wrong.
No, and I think it goes back to the identity piece that Rabbi mentioned before. My kids know they're Jewish.
Right.
If someone says to them Merry Christmas, they're not questioning their faith. They're not going, "Oh, what am I?" They're not. It's because it's starting at home with what we're instilling in them. And we have very open conversations that the majority of the world celebrates Christmas. That's why we see so much of it. That's why we see, pictures of Santa and sleighs and reindeers and PJs everywhere. We're getting there slowly but surely, but we are always going to be the minority. That's just who we are. They know they're Jewish. They know we celebrate Hanukkah. And so I also don't want it to offend them. I don't want them to be the kids who are walking around correcting everyone, saying, "No, no, 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 I'm Jewish. We only say Happy Hanukkah." I feel like we all have to just kind of accept each other and learn together and leave room for error.
I think, Rachel, that reflects your emotional maturity. So that is, you don't have to correct people when they make mistakes all the time. You understand where it needs a corrective and where you just can let it go. It might have to do with time, it might have to do with place, it might have to do with whether or not your kids are with you. And so that, so it's really, it takes that discernment, and that discernment is really about you being comfortable and, again, not being reactive or defensive, etc. We can teach people important lessons when we let them know that we're different, and look at us, we're the same, but we're different. And so I think that reflects your emotional maturity. And I wish everybody had it, because there's some Jews that are willing to battle every time Merry comes out of someone's mouth.
Yeah, it's true.
It's not necessary.
What if it was reversed? What if, you started going up to people that you assumed were Jewish and you said Happy Hanukkah, but they weren't Jewish? Would you think that they would correct you? They'd probably say, "No, I celebrate Christmas, Merry Christmas." So I'm just curious as to, like, if we just started walking around saying Happy Hanukkah to everybody, like everyone says Merry Christmas, how would people react?
They would look at us like we're crazy.
Right.
Or they would have no idea and they would say thank you.
Well,
So
I think for me, the question was with a minority culture, what the response, we understand it's, we want to participate and remain true to ourselves. But I also felt like as the minority culture, there's a responsibility to be visible versus to blend. And so it's a very tricky situation, I think, because I think the whole drama here is about inclusivity, but still having strong Jewish identity. So that, because we're trying to protect and preserve and be open. And so it's a wobble. It's always a wobble, I
Yeah,
think.
I was in Costco yesterday with Julian, and we were standing in a huge line, and I had a bunch of like books and stuff for like kids, and someone was like, "Oh, you're getting a lot of Christmas presents," and I just were standing in line, so I just was like, "Yeah, no, these are his Hanukkah presents," and they didn't say anything, but they were older and I didn't want to get into it, but I did actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I did say these are actually his Hanukkah presents, or Hanukkah presents for whoever. I didn't like, it just kind of naturally came out of my mouth. Normally I just kind of go with the Merry Christmas, and the same thing as Rachel was saying, I'm not like correcting people, but it just happened where I just said, these are his Hanukkah presents, and they didn't really say anything.
But that's what I was saying about place and time. That might have been really appropriate to say at that moment. So
Yeah.
Can I raise another issue, Karen?
Yes, please.
Okay, so my son recently did his own podcast with his Louis puppet. He spoke about Black Friday right after Thanksgiving. And he gave a different spin on it. And he spoke about the following. These holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas and Hanukkah, there's such a buildup for them, such high expectations. And all the messaging that you see on television is all about being together with family, and everything looks so wonderful and so perfect that you're all wearing the same pajamas on the couch, loving each other so much. Most people don't have that experience. For a lot of people, Thanksgiving is pretty lonely. For a lot of people, Thanksgiving is alienating, even though the holiday is beautiful, but they don't necessarily have that embracing family or that experience. And similarly with Christmas, a lot of people are not really there with their families, or with Hanukkah. And so what he was saying about Black Friday is it's corporate America's way of filling people's emotional hole. And so what we're going to do is, you don't feel good about really important stuff here, but you're going to shop. You're going to have things. And the more things you have, the better that you're going to feel about yourself. And that more attention needs to be paid towards the human values that we really hold dear. So last night we had our Hanukkah celebration here. And what we chose to focus on was the TLC program and the work that our families have done over the past month to help people who are in need and people who are underserved. And that's really an important thing to think about with Hanukkah. That is, you can't just keep throwing gifts at your kids for 8 nights. You got to have your kids understand that these come from someplace. You have to have your kids understand there are other people who may not get those gifts, that we could do a project together, that we can help other people, and that the gifts are not just in the materialism of this world. So we have to kind of hone in on the spiritual message, the historical ideas, but also the human responsibility that comes with this celebration.
Thank you. I think that's our perfect wrap up. I know that there's a ton more to say, but we'll end with Happy Hanukkah. And
Happy Hanukkah. And if there are any non-Jewish partners that are watching this, happy holidays, Merry Christmas to you, but Happy Hanukkah to all of our Jewish friends. Yeah.
And as always, you guys always give us hope for a very bright future with a lot of ahava. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
You don't have to go.